Welcome to our Focus Forum. I'm Rita Riker, President of Focus Greater Syracuse, and so pleased to welcome you all here. I want to thank EDR for their generous sponsorship of today's Focus Forum. EDR's mission is dedicated to creating and sustaining a better environment for their clients, their employees, and their communities. You can read more about EDR's mission on our website, focussyracuse.org. Today, we are happy to welcome our three panelists from the Syracuse-Onondaga Food Systems Alliance, commonly referred to as SOFSA. They have developed a presentation that will explore what food systems are, how they function, and the ways each of us are connected to them. Raymond Brown will kick us off with background information on food systems and SOFSA. Raymond is a community connector with SOFSA. He brings lived experience and leadership skills to maintain SOFSA's relationships and accountability to the communities it serves, as well as accountability to SOFSA leadership as part of its co-governance with the board. Next, Renee Marcoux will review SOFSA's work and will talk to us about, hold on just a second, listening sessions that they've had and what they're hearing from their listening sessions. Renee serves as SOFSA's Equity, Inclusion, and Engagement Manager, bringing over 10 years of expertise in food justice and urban agriculture, and driving initiatives that prioritize community engagement to bring about systemic change. Micah Arrieta will review SOFSA's work and its impact as he wraps up the presentation. Micah serves as the Food Systems and Network Building Organizer at SOFSA, passionately advocating for food sovereignty and leveraging their background in communications to connect diverse community members and amplify local initiatives. So we're going to begin with Raymond. Raymond, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. My name is Raymond. Good afternoon, everybody. I am a community connector with SOFSA. Community connectors represent the interests of community members who have been historically marginalized, help direct the how, the what, and the why of our mission as we move forward in forging and strengthening community relationships. As leaders within the organization, community connectors co-govern with the board, providing key accountability recommendations that ground SOFSA and its values of justice and equity. I'd like to start by offering a land acknowledgement. Lands we know as Syracuse and Onondaga County sit on ancestral Haudenosaunee, sorry about that, I butchered that, I'm sure, territory. We honor our neighbors, the Onondaga Nation, who continue stewardship of this land and efforts towards reparative justice. SOFSA is working towards building relations with the Haudenosaunee and indigenous peoples as a whole. In support of indigenous lands, reclamation, and food sovereignty efforts through advocacy, policy, and raising awareness. We recognize that land acknowledgements are just the first step and encourage everyone to support, honor, and educate themselves on the history of this land and its peoples. In the next few slides, I'll be talking about SOFSA to give a little context around the work we are doing. SOFSA was established in 2019 by a group of food system stakeholders, including people in agriculture, food service, nonprofits, education, healthcare, community organizing, academia, and more. When we talk about our work, we often refer to the head, the heart, and the hands to refer to what, the why, and the how. I'll be going over each of these in more detail in the next slides. Our mission statement is the Syracuse-Onondaga Food Systems Alliance, aka SOFSA, is a network of changemakers dedicated to reshaping our region's food system, grounded in principles of transformative justice and reciprocity. We cultivate connection, collaboration, and coordination across sectors to mobilize our collective resources towards more just and sustainable food future in Syracuse, Onondaga County, and Onondaga Nation. Our grounding philosophy is rooted in interdependence, responsible stewardship, and ancestral wisdom. SOFSA serves as a seed planted in the rich soil of our community, nourished by values that question authority, value community, cherish our connection to the earth and all living things. Like each of the three sisters, We aim not only to grow and thrive ourselves, but also to support the growth and well-being of all members of our community. Before we even begin to consider acting on the work, we are ensuring that everything we do is rooted in equity and justice. It's not enough that there are enough seats at the table. We're asking who is missing, who isn't getting their fair share, who has a language barrier, etc. And then we can look at our work, and it falls into 4 buckets or branches of trees, each working together to tackle systems change. SOFSA at its core is a food policy council. We are really so much more than that. When we think about the food systems we offer, think about how we get our food, but there's so much more that is happening under the surface. If you pull on one thread, it affects many things. Take, for instance, when the USDA slashed funding for the Emergency Food Assistance Program by 50%. This didn't just affect food banks, food pantries, and the folks who go to the food pantries. It affects the farmers who used to sell their product via the funding stream, who now have to store their product or compost perfectly good food. It affects the truckers who would transport the food, educators who support hungry children, healthcare workers see sicker people, and the folks who are the most marginalized suffer the most. Power imbalances and current strains on our food system make it both very vulnerable or disruptions, and yet still very entrenched. So what are we going to do about it? What we do as a food policy council is connect folks who are on the ground doing the work, that being farmers, school food administrators, environmentalists, healthcare professionals, with the people making decisions, whether about policy, funding, or otherwise. We build connections with folks on the ground so we understand the issues they are working with and are better able to advocate both with them and on their behalf. Thanks, and I'm going to pass it over to Renee now.
Thanks so much, Raymond. So in talking about food insecurity, the question of if we're funding food pantries and other emergency food access programs, why doesn't hunger end often arises. I hope if you weren't familiar with food systems and systemic barriers before, you can see how complex the problems are and how entrenched they are within current capitalistic power structures. So how does SOFSA work? As Raymond explained earlier, all of our actions are rooted in equity and justice and deeply relationship-based. Again, we work to ensure that not only are the folks most adversely affected by systemic oppression at the table, but they're also equipped with the skills and knowledge to advocate on behalf of themselves and their community. Prior to SOFSA's inception, many organizations and individuals here in the area reported feeling incredibly siloed in their work. For example, folks working in one food pantry, not even knowing others in the area, what resources they had to offer, the timing, or even the location. As we've built up our cross-sector connections, we know that network building keeps our movement powerful. Some of the ways that we continue to meet and connect, both formal and casual, are highlighted on this slide. For instance, our affinity group spaces are for folks with a specific identity to gather in a safe, agenda-free space. Our current affinity groups include Global Majority, which is inclusive of people of color, and Pride, which is inclusive of LGBTQIA+ community. It's kind of a wonderful thing to see an agendaless space being offered. I feel like so often we're tied to productivity, and some of the most creative ideas and conversations happen in our affinity group spaces. Some of our other events and gatherings include civic engagement workshops, which support an entry into advocacy and eases the trepidation some folks feel about engaging with their elected officials, and our urban garden tour. This happens annually in the summer and includes garden workshops and informal networking. Another large part of our relationship building is conducting listening sessions. SOFSA's work is informed by community in many different ways, and this is just one of many. It's one of the most powerful ways that we work to hear folks across Syracuse, Onondaga County, and Onondaga Nation. So much of our advocacy work is informed by these listening sessions. And they don't inform just for our own advocacy, but create platforms for participants to advocate for themselves. So depending on the listening session and who the participants are, we facilitate a discussion about what's working well, what barriers are folks facing, and what do folks want others to know about their situation. We aim to host, 4 to 6 listening sessions a year, partnering with diverse organizations across sectors, from new American farmers to food pantry managers and attendees, to folks focused on transportation as a barrier to access. So how does food insecurity show up in our current food system? It shows up in ways that are expected, but also surprising. These are some of the things that we've heard directly from folks within our listening sessions. It shows up in small-scale farmers who are growing our food but can't afford groceries. It shows up in Skinny Atlas, where many folks dismiss as high income, but don't think of the migrant farmer families who are living there. It shows up in homebound elders, and shows up in folks who don't know how to cook the food they receive at the pantry or have no access to cooking equipment. Again, we know this because we are hearing directly from folks at our listening sessions. What do we do with this information? We're advocating. We're connecting folks to resources. We're connecting organizations to other organizations who are doing similar work. And we're educating wider audiences, both about the extent of the issues and ways to get involved. So what are we seeing right now as needs and barriers? As no surprise to anyone, there's wide-ranging concerns about funding from folks who are direct recipients of grants, as folks who are downstream of recipients of grants, and then also from folks and pantries who receive individual donations. They're worried about cost of living rising, causing people to need to tighten their own belts to survive. For one example, there's a pantry down in southern part of the county that does an individual donation campaign around the December holidays. They usually receive about $2,500, and this is enough to carry them for a good long while. And if they don't receive these individual donations, it'll be, kind of catastrophic for that one pantry, and that's just one of many. There's also concerns about the actual food, concerns about food quality, food quantity. Folks are reporting that the amount of food they're receiving from food pantries has decreased significantly. Folks are also worried about food safety, and this is especially with regard to the USDA sunsetting or closing funding for their own food safety recording and audits. There's concerns about the types of food offered, both culturally relevant, and then also a reduction of fresh produce, and then a higher amount of processed foods being received. And then related to that, they're worried about receiving unusable food, either as a result of dietary restrictions or health issues or other similar concerns. And then there's concerns about other social determinants of health affecting food access. These barriers include a lack of transportation, being unhoused or having unstable housing, language barriers for non-English speakers. And then with regards to employment, folks either being unemployed or underemployed, causing a large rise in the need for emergency food access, or having a job but having that limit access to food pantry because pantries are often open during those same hours that folks are working. So in addition to elevating the concerns of our network, we also create opportunities for direct engagement. After years of doing listening sessions, for example, we decided to level up this spring and do a cross-sector elected official listening session. We invited participants from all different vantage points within the food system to share directly with their representatives who were there to listen and ask questions. Because again, going back to that question of why is hunger still a problem when food pantries are funded? With systemic barriers in place right now, we need both on-the-ground emergency food programs and high-level systems change that comes from advocating for food policies that work for all of us, including the environment. And I'm going to pass it off to Micah, who's going to kind of talk about what we're doing to address all these things that we're hearing and seeing.
Hey y'all, thanks Renee and Raymond for all that context. Yeah, so I'm gonna, like Renee said, talk about what do we do with all this information that we collect. And I think, right, both Renee and Raymond talked a little bit about this in terms of our advocacy work, cross-sector elevation, and basically being bridges from what we're seeing and hearing from folks on the ground, and how do we get that to folks that either have, right, like the political resources or the financial resources or the relational resources to really like do something about that. And so the bulk of what we do with what we hear can be really divided into these three different categories. We're looking at advocacy, education, and network resourcing. And I'll talk a little bit about all of these and connect them as I go. So starting with advocacy and civic engagement, as a food policy council, working right in the middle of civil society and government, but not embedded in government, we have a beautiful opportunity to engage our elected officials. And we do that either through building direct relationships with them, as well as through doing direct advocacy with aligned coalitions. But we also engage, right, the constituencies through doing things like voter education, and through helping hold elected officials accountable by getting their stances on the record, stuff like that. At the core of all of this work, we're really thinking about narrative shifting and story sharing. Right, so the insights that Renee gathers from listening sessions of like, right, taking Skinny Atlas, for example, where we think about it as a really affluent space, but then there are pockets of high need and specific populations that are really impacted by everything that's going on, right? How can we shed light on that and elevate that? That's part of that story sharing and narrative shifting, is saying you might not see a problem here if the problem exists, right? And how can we not so much normalize the problem, but bring attention to it in a way that leads to action. In terms of our direct advocacy, right, I mentioned working in coalition spaces. So we work with other organizations at the state level, sometimes beyond the state level, but not usually. And then at the beginning of the year during advocacy season, right, we go to DC, we go to Albany, and we engage directly with our representatives, elevating all of these issues that we're seeing on the ground. Our folks in the coalition space are often a little bit more kind of hands-on in terms of like, oh, we want this specific policy to pass, right? And so we're kind of tying that policy to the stories that we're hearing to give them weight and really get our local officials to listen. So here we see our director, Maura, at a press conference held to address hunger in New York earlier this year. And here on the right, meetings with Senator May's office as we're talking about SNAP, universal school meals, double up food bucks, all of these programs that are really lifelines for folks, regardless of whether they're accessing food pantries or not, right? They're some of our most effective poverty reduction tools. In the side of voter education, what we do yearly is we publish a food policy voter guide. And so this is a sneak peek of what the inside of that guide looks like. But we basically, we have our own list of policy priorities that are collected through the network, through our policy and planning committee. And then we take those priorities, we use them to lead our own advocacy, and we also use them to pulse check our candidates for election to see where they stand on certain issues. Different offices have different issues that are relevant to them. So we might ask folks at the county ledge level, write 11 questions of like, where do you stand on these policy positions? And we might ask other offices for. But at the end, we collect all of those responses and we publish a food policy voter guide that is shared out to folks to help people in the public understand where their politicians stand at the time that they go to the polls. And then something that I think is super important when we're thinking about and talking about advocacy, right, is that it's really easy to think about advocacy as saying, okay, here's an issue on the ground. I'm going to go to my elected official and I'm going to ask them to do something about it, right? But advocacy looks like so much more than that. And these are some of our policy advocacy pushes that we're working on, right? So we are doing SNAP advocacy at that level where we're working in coalition and taking concerns and asks to our elected officials, but then we're also looking at aggregation, right? And that's something that eventually if we do want our elected officials to really pay attention to and fund it. But the advocacy at that level really looks like who is interested in doing aggregation, right? Aggregation is really important to get food to pantries, schools, especially if we want to elevate local agriculture. Small farms might not have the capacity to produce at the quantity that they need in order to feed a school, or might not have the processing ability to get their carrots cut up into a shape that the cafeterias can use. And so having infrastructure like aggregation and processing is super important. But before or kind of concurrently to doing that advocacy with our electeds, we have to be building connections with folks on the ground to see, okay, you have a space that can be used for aggregation. You're interested in participating in aggregation. You have the expertise. Who are all of the players that need to come together for this to happen, right? And how can we build a solid case for this is possible so that then we can pitch it to our elected officials to get funding imbued into it, right? And so that's a super important critical part of the advocacy work that we do. It's really in that relationship building, in like casting a wide net to understand, okay, clearly there's a need. There's people that are interested in solving this need. How can we bring them all to the table so that we can work together? We're doing that when it comes to farm to institution and local procurement. We're working with folks on urban agriculture at that level. And we're also exploring transportation to get folks right from areas where there's really high food insecurity related to there not being access to grocery stores to places where grocery stores do exist. And then finally, right, we have resources and capacity alignment. So, right, we do the advocacy, we help shift the narrative through education, and then we also support folks in like getting the funding that they need to really execute some of these projects. We do this through the lens of community-centric fundraising, which really looks to prioritize the community and it's movement aligned. So it's not just thinking, let's us raise money as an organization because our mission is the most important, but really, how can we represent our constituency and distribute money and resources in a way that's more equitable? We do that internally through our Plant a Seed with SOFSA campaign, where we redistribute most of the funding that we get through there to our Food Justice Fund, which I will talk about in a minute. And so that's a direct line of redistribution. But we also support folks who are seeking funding, right? So we have all this experience as an organization doing grant writing, accessing different funding streams. So we're really trying to leverage the relationships that we hold to support other projects that are happening in Syracuse by introducing people, signing letters of support, helping them in their grant applications, different things depending on what is important in that case. And then as for our Food Justice Fund, this is the second year that we've done it. Through the last 2 years that we have done it, we've redistributed over $50,000 across 14 different projects. This year, we re-granted 30 grand across 7 projects, and it's always so cool to see, right, like what people are thinking of as solutions to the problems that they're seeing in their community. So some of these projects that got funded are really, let's do education around urban agriculture, right? Like let's empower our youth to learn where their food comes from and to be able to grow it themselves. Some of them are mutual aid initiatives of like, let's pay farmers that are doing this work so that they can donate food to the food pantries and still get money in exchange. Some of them are just like food pantries, right? So we're talking about the emergency food system. Food pantries need support with improvements in their infrastructure for cold storage or to expand programs or to have program coordinators, stuff like that. So the Food Justice Fund is really cool because it's really flexible, but specifically because it's accountable to and shaped by the community. So there's a Food Justice Fund Leadership Council that is responsible for curating the whole application process, making sure that it's accessible. And then the final voting is passed off to the community so that everybody in Syracuse, Onondaga County, and Onondaga Nation can vote on who they want to see receive the funding, right? So not only are the projects coming from the community, but the community is choosing, these are problems that we're seeing, and we want to see these things as solutions to those issues. We're constantly trying to grow this program, and we're really proud of it. It's been really successful in the past 2 years. Yeah, so that's basically the gist of how those things shape the action. I just wanted to finish with a quick plug of if you want to learn more about food systems and folks that are involved in doing this work at all different levels, you can join us in October for our food justice gathering. It's October 25th. It's a day-long convening where we're really centering relationship buildings and conversations around food justice. And Robin Walkimmer is going to be our keynote speaker. If you don't know who she is, I highly recommend you look her up. She's brilliant. And then on Monday, we have a candidate press conference on food and hunger issues. That's when we will reveal this year's voter guide. And we've invited candidates that have responded to the voter guide to show up and talk about how they're going to invest in our local food system. And finally, if you want to learn more about how to do advocacy and storytelling, our friends at Equity Advocates are hosting these 2 workshops in October and November, exploring those things. And that's it for our presentation. So yeah, I think now we can open for questions. I'll pass it back off to Rita.
Great. Thank you so much, Micah, Renee, and Raymond. So we received quite a few questions ahead of time. Board Emeritus, Focus Board Emeritus, Brian Hoke is going to lead us in those questions. I also saw some questions coming through the chat, and as we have time, we'll try to get to those as well. So I'm gonna go off camera while the rest of you stay here.
Thanks, Rita. And thanks, I'll add my thanks to Renee, Micah, and Raymond as well. Enjoyed, as I'm sure everybody here did, hearing about the work you're doing. We had, as Rita mentioned, quite a few questions submitted in advance. Again, if you do have questions, you're welcome to post them to the Q&A or chat feature. We may not get to them, given that we have some in advance, but if they come up and we could fit them in, we'll certainly be happy to. One thing I would note, and I think Alicia responded to it by text, but just for the benefit of others, somebody, thank you, anonymous attendee, asked in the Q&A feature if the slides would be available. And I think I'm right in saying, Renee, Mike, and Raymond, right, that you would be kind enough to share those and we can post them on our website. Is that fair? Cool. All right. So that that'll be available to folks. So as I mentioned, we had quite a few questions in advance. Many of them were themed around engagement and advocacy and participation, right? I mean, Focus it's a warm group, right? People are interested, they want to get involved. For instance, Michael said, how can we as ordinary people make a difference for the hungry? What is most needed, time, talent, or treasure? Micah, you ended your bit with talking a little bit about how people can get involved. I wonder if we might dig deeper into what can folks do? What can we who are not connected in a professional setting, perhaps, how can we get involved and push the ball forward on this issue?
Yeah, thanks, Michael, for that question. Yeah, that is so often the big question is like, what can we do? And I think, right, we've shaped all of this conversation, at least internally, as like, right, if we're thinking about emergency food systems, the need there is huge. And we need certainly action in the here and now to make sure that people are being served through the emergency food system, whether it's pantries, food distributions, etc. And we also need change at a local and broader levels, right, to make sure that we're not depending as heavily on the emergency food system, right, because it's not built to really hold the level of demand that is currently happening. And so when I get, right, a question like this of like, what can we do? I think that is really a question that has a lot of factors. It's like, well, what are you, it really starts with like, what are you positioned to do, right? If you, right, have like an endowment fund, right, and you want to support food movement where, right, we're all struggling for funding. All donations go a really long way. And conversely, right, like if you don't have those financial resources, but you have like a Friday morning off, right, you can check what food distribution sites are in your area at a time where you're available and you can show up. They're always looking for volunteers. Their folks are looking for leadership support and like board appointments. Yeah, I think a really important thing that we can all be doing, regardless of like our level of access point, is really taking food policy seriously when we're going to the polls, right? And really digging deeper and being aware of how the way that we're voting is going to impact what we're seeing on the ground as it pertains to policy and financial allocation to food systems work.
Great, thank you. Renee or Raymond, would you either of you like to come in on that point? about how folks might get involved?
Sure.
Please.
Just would love to, kind of second what Micah was saying. When it comes to what you have to offer, whether that's time, money, skills, knowledge, any and all of it, it would be happily received at a variety of different places. I think if you are looking for places, you can join our listserv.
Okay.
When you receive our slides, you'll have information on how to get involved with SOFSA. And there are often organizations that put out asks for volunteers or for donations or for those type of things. And that's kind of a really low-hanging fruit if you're, not already actively involved and looking for a way to get involved in this work. But sharing from Robin Wall Kimmerer's new book, The Service Berry, it does well to have, an abundance mindset and thinking about moving from, a capitalistic economy to a gifting economy. She talks about that extensively in the book. And where we can share what we have with others, so that it multiplies and becomes greater than the sum of its parts. But I think all of us have something that we can share and do.
All right, thank you. Raymond, sir, do you want to commit? No need to. Welcome to if you have something to say. You don't have to. Please.
No, yeah, I did. I mean, it's pretty much around to what both Renee and Micah got at. This is at the end of the day, this is a community, a group effort. And any bit helps. If you have time, I would say donate your time. If you have money, you can donate your money. There's always something you can do, and worrying about how much you're doing or if you're doing enough isn't really the goal. It's just about whether or not you're dedicated to the cause and whether or not it's something that you want to be involved in. So if you want to be involved, find any way that you can to be involved. And that's pretty much all I could say on the matter. We appreciate any level of commitment or help, no matter how much of it we do get.
Cool. All right. Thank you. Thank you all three of you for those remarks. We had a related but slightly different question from Ayana, who asked about where you all see students, either at high school, college, fitting into the food system, and what does involvement from those folks look like? And I know some of you touched on work to educate students, but I'm wondering what their participation, perhaps, as as frontline workers in towards the cause, right? I mean, how do they fit in? How could somebody who's closer to 18 by far than me make a difference, get involved over and beyond what you've already shared?
Sure, I can start us off.
Please.
We are always interested in student and youth engagement around food, farming, food systems. These are our next generation leaders, our future food system leaders. And so we do work closely with Syracuse City School District and other Onondaga County school districts, specifically around student engagement concerning both nutrition and school meals. And so it was talking, a little bit about aggregation and institutional buying. There is a lot of power in what at the quantity that institutions can purchase. But there are a lot of barriers in place in terms of getting local ag, of which we have so much, to these schools. And so, we talk a lot with school food directors and dietitians within the school districts around student engagement concerning the school meals. And then, we are working towards more engagement with regards to food systems curriculum and community engagement. We do have internships or fellowships for college or recent college graduates for different areas like school food, urban ag, within SOFSA. And so every year we have a cohort of fellows who are younger. who are
Oh,
interested.
really? I'm sorry to interrupt, but with SOFSA directly with your organization, not just with your
Yes.
partner. Oh, interesting.
Right,
Okay.
right, right.
Cool.
Yep, and so we also work fairly closely with colleges and universities in the area. We sometimes speak at classes and then have involvement from a lot of different points within academia.
Interesting. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Mike or Raymond, anything either of you would like to add to that regarding younger folks? All good?
No, I think Renee about covered it.
Okay. All right. Cool. Switching to a different topic, Gail asked about what impact might you expect from cuts to SNAP, that is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, to have in general and specific in our area in particular. Wonder what you might have to say about that. And maybe we could start with what cuts have happened, what might we expect to, not knowing the specifics myself. I'm sure others are in a similar place. You could give us some details on that. I think that'd be a good way to start.
Yeah. Raymond, do you feel comfortable taking this on? I think I listed out a few of them in the email.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry about that. Just
No worries.
trying to get the mute button off. But yes. So yeah, there's a few things on that. As far as I know, there's tons of impacts listed here. We know that Hunger Solutions New York released some stats on how federal cuts will affect SNAP here in New York, and it's a statewide nonprofit organization dedicated to alleviating hunger. They recently passed the budget reconciliation bill that will have a harmful impact on the SNAP and the nearly 3 million New Yorkers who rely on it to put food on the table. The law shifts significant costs to New York State's budget, eliminates eligibility for many lawfully present immigrants, expands harsh work reporting requirements, and reduces benefit amounts. These changes represent a profound reduction in federal support for food security, threatening the sustainability of our largest and most effective hunger program. Some examples: effective as early 2027, shifts an estimated 1.2 billion in SNAP benefit cost each year to New York State's budget, potentially forcing cuts to SNAP or other critical state investments. Effective October 2026, cuts federal funding for SNAP administration in half, resulting in 200 million in additional costs to state and counties each year. It also expands some work reporting requirements to 125,000 older adults and 80,000 adults with school-aged children, putting more than 300,000 additional New Yorkers at risk of losing some or all of their household SNAP benefits. Obviously, these numbers are alarming, and if you are not already contacting your elected officials, now's the time to do so.
Gotcha. All right. So
Yeah.
doesn't
I
seem,
just want to
Micah, go ahead, please.
plug. I linked an info sheet in the chat from Hunger
good, okay.
Solutions that they've created a really, I'm not gonna say it's beautiful because the contents of it are really awful. Right, the impacts are huge. But if you're trying to understand more about what Raymond was just talking to, visit that link. There are some complicated terms that then are hyperlinked. The articles that are hyperlinked to they do a really beautiful job of like explaining what those things mean and how those impacts will be felt. So take a look there. But maybe get yourself something cozy and comforting while you're doing it.
Before diving into the tough news. Gotcha. Okay. Well, thank you. A couple other points I want to make sure we pick up before we run out of time. Jessica asks, how can food pantries be made mobile for those with limited or no access to transportation? So we certainly have volunteers who do things like Meals on Wheels, right? But you all, being thick in the middle of the cause of the work, wondering what is being done already on that front and what else might be done. Innovative solutions you see, or quality programs that are working well now, or could, with some innovations, be improved. Renee, please.
I think what we're seeing right now is responsive to the times. We do see some pantries that are implementing deliveries, especially to folks like homebound seniors.
Mhm.
We are also hearing from a lot of pantry managers that this is where they need volunteers. If you have transportation, are able to be a volunteer who can offer deliveries to folks, there is certainly a need for them. But then, I mean, thinking about this at a higher level, there is definitely a need for more comprehensive, accessible transportation as a whole. This is something that SOFSA has been advocating for on many different levels, whether, you know, that's accessible public transportation with Centro, um, you know, better bus lines, even just studies kind of looking at where the highest needs are, and so where we can be laser focused in our advocacy. Because I think right now everyone knows that public transport in Syracuse is, for lack of a better word, awful. And so yes, there are people responding to the needs, and also yes, the need is greater than what people are able to provide right now.
And I assume that's a relatively recent thing, right? I mean, the pantry model is there is food in a place and those who need it come to get it, right? I mean, is that, as I mean, I confess my ignorance, right? Is that something that's been going on for a long time, or is that a relatively recent development?
I think the need is going up. I would say pantries at this point have never seen, even during the pandemic, the needs are higher now than during the pandemic, you know, at its height. Um, and it's different for every area of the county. You think about areas in like the rural outskirts of our county. If you don't have transportation in, say, Tully, it is nearly impossible to get anywhere. And also thinking about those smaller pantries, you know, building those relationships are key. Those folks who manage the pantries know those people on such a tight level. They're all community members. And so that's really where you see, you know, oh, I'll just drive out to so-and-so's house and drop off these pantries because I know them. And so I think the need has always been there. It maybe hasn't been so in your face, so to speak. But yeah, the need is definitely greater.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah.
Micah or Raymond, anything? I don't want to cut you off if either of you would like to add anything to that thread.
Yeah, I will
Please.
just add, at least from my vantage point, right, your part of your question was if this is like a new thing, and I don't know how long mobile pantries have been happening. I'm sure they're not like, oh, this is like a brand new thing from the last couple of years. But I think kind of to Renee's point, like with that heightened need, people are having to think about those innovations. I have seen some different opportunities for funding or interest in kind of like infrastructure funding to develop mobile pantries. But again, to Renee's point, like folks are really struggling with capacity and like the pantries themselves not being able to meet the need that is existing, right? Like more people are coming to the pantries than they're able to feed often. And so to then expand to the mobile pantry market is a challenge, but certainly, I don't know the ins and outs of it, but there are a lot of really cool innovations. They're doing like pantry lockers, right? So Renee mentioned that like folks that work 9 to 5 don't necessarily aren't necessarily able to access the pantries at the time that they're doing food distribution. But in some places they're piloting like these lockers where then after work people can go and get their food box.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so certainly it's there's a lot of good people putting their heads together to make that happen. We just don't necessarily know all of the ins and outs and particulars.
Got it. Well, thank you for that. I see we're just about out of time. I guess I will turn it back to Rita, but thank you, all three of you, very much for being here, for sharing your thoughts and your expertise on what's going on. So Rita, back over to you.
Yes, thank you. And I will echo Brian's thank you to Renee and Raymond and Micah for your presentation today. I think I learned a lot, and I'm hoping others have as well. As with our forums, we'll be posting this forum on our website shortly, and apparently we'll also be posting the presentation document that you used today. Another big thank you to EDR for their sponsorship of this forum. We are happy to speak with others who might be interested in sponsoring one or more forums. We are very grateful to those who have helped us keep focus going with your donations. If you are so inclined, there's an easy way to donate to Focus on our website, and a donation of any amount would be greatly appreciated. Thanks to all, thanks to everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Again, enjoy. Thanks.